Former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh has been dipping his toes back into the turbulent waters of city politics, throwing his support behind his former staffer, John FitzGerald, who's running for an open seat on the city council. It is Walsh's first formal endorsement since he left City Hall for the Biden administration and then stepped down as labor secretary earlier this year to become the head of the NHL Players Union. Since then, according to David Bernstein in Boston Magazine, Walsh seems to be in the Boston public eye more and more, raising questions about the former mayor's future in the city and its politics. David joins me now, along with the managing editor of the Dorchester Reporter, Dumcius. Great to see you both. So David, the piece was a super fun read, and I'm thrilled you can be here to talk about it. What were the events that you put together that made you say, you know, Marty Walsh has never been entirely gone from Boston, but he's raising his profile lately. What's he been doing?
Well, part of it is that he was deliberately staying out of the limelight, both because of Hatch Act sorts of, when you're working for the federal government, but also he really did see himself as needing to step back to give the new mayor, both Kim Janey and then Michelle Wu, some space, not overshadow them. But then this year we've seen him give some speeches. I mentioned one that he gave to New England Council in South Boston. He threw out the first pitch at Dorchester Little League. He gave a commencement speech at Suffolk Law, those kinds of things. And he's just been showing up. I had been hearing more and more about, I saw Marty Walsh at this event, that event. It just seemed that he's more in the spotlight. Obviously, he's in town more. He never really moved to Washington, but he was there during the week. So now he's in Boston more, even though he is technically working for a Canadian company.
You mentioned good point. You mentioned he never stopped getting his hair cut at the same barber in the North End, right? Even when he was labor secretary, he was still going to Salem Street to get a haircut?
Yep, that's right. I double-checked that with him. I had a nice conversation with him about how he stayed in touch with Boston. He still continued to go to, he's in Alcoholics Anonymous, as he's talked about publicly, and he continued to go to his meetings here, in Boston. His regular things. He spent the week in hotel rooms in D.C. He also traveled the country a lot as labor secretary, but he stayed very much grounded and continued, by the way, to get phone calls from people for help on any number of issues.
Again, in David's piece, he quotes Walsh talking about his relationship to Mayor Wu and her shifting course compared to his administration in various areas. David quotes Walsh saying, effectively, you got to roll with that. If you've been mayor, your successor comes in, does different things. You want him to succeed. You don't let it ruffle your feathers. And yet, David also links to a piece that you wrote for the Reporter back when Walsh gave this speech to the New England Council, in which he seemed to be maybe doing something a little different there. Can you just recount for people who might not have caught it what he said in that speech and what it might have indicated about how he receives criticism from Mayor Wu?
Sure. Well, it was in front of the New England Council, which is a business-backed group run by Jim Brett, who used to be a state rep and ran for mayor as well against Menino. Secretary Walsh spoke at that event, and it came a few days after Mayor Wu's State of the Union, where she was, didn't mention the Walsh administration, but there was a lot of criticism in that speech in terms of development. And, what struck me about that speech is it kind of like slowly dawned on me as I was listening to it was, he was offering this defense of his administration. And I talked to people in the room afterwards, a politically savvy crowd, and that was their read too, which was interesting. And this was before the NHL hockey news came out. At that point, he was in the mix for potentially White House chief of staff. So there was a question of what does he do next? Does he stay at the White House? Does he stay, or what does he do next? So that was kind of the interesting dynamic that was happening there.
I think you were the first person to report that he is endorsing in this city council race. Can you tell people who might not be familiar with the race, who's he endorsing and why is he backing this particular candidate?
Sure. So the person he's endorsing is John FitzGerald, who works for the Boston Planning and Development Agency. John FitzGerald is also the son of Kevin FitzGerald, a longtime Mission Hill state rep who passed away, in 2007, I believe. And Walsh actually shared an office at the State House with Rep. FitzGerald. They were both in recovery as well. So they bonded over that. And Walsh obviously hired the younger FitzGerald when he became mayor. So FitzGerald has been a key part of the Walsh kind of circle since then.
And he's running to replace Frank Baker, and Walsh is actually going to be knocking on doors for him this weekend, right?
Yes, they'll be in Savin Hill and Dorchester, Walsh's old neighborhood, as well as Frank Baker's.
That's a nice boost for FitzGerald to get. David, you point out in your piece that, at least in some quarters, there is this ongoing dream of Walsh coming back and running for mayor again against Michelle Wu. You kick the tires on that and decide that that's not going to happen, right? You think we can rule that out?
Well, I think it's a bit of a pipe dream. I'd be interested if Ginn has been hearing similar things to what I heard, which is really from the business, finance, development kind of circles. People who spent a lot of money opposing Michelle Wu in the 2021 mayoral election and certainly would be eager, certainly do not have fonder feelings toward her in office, and would certainly love for a white knight to come in and run against her in 2025. I don't see him wanting to do that. If nothing else, he's signed up with this Players Association. The NHL current bargaining agreement runs, I believe, through the 2025-26 season. So he'll be working on that contract. I can't imagine him bailing before that unless maybe Biden called him back for some reason.
He'd have to take a pretty enormous pay cut, too, to switch from that job to potentially being mayor again. Ginn, does that square with stuff that you've been hearing, that this is not, even if some people love this idea of a Walsh-Wu race, it's not something that we're going to see?
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing other names instead. I can't really, still reporting those out, but, you know.
Shoot, I really want to hear those. Well, when the camera stops rolling.
Well, there are a lot of rumors out there, and there's names that are getting floated, and then, you call or you talk to someone close with that person, and it turns out, no, that's not true. So I think Boston politics, people love to talk. They love to gossip.
Yeah, here we are.
Here we are. So it's one of those things where, we'll see. I mean, the mayoral election is not that far away. The city council elections are this fall. If someone was to mount a challenge, they'd have to get started pretty early, just as Mayor Wu did herself in, I believe it was September 2020 is when she launched her campaign.
She did get going early. All right, well, obviously that raises the question. If Walsh is probably not going to run for his old job again, what do you think we might reasonably speculate that he could do in the future in the world of politics? Because, David, one of my big takeaways from your piece was that, and again, I would guess that you would agree with this, based on your own reporting, he loves this stuff, right? It's the water he's swum in for decades. It's a big part of who he is. So is it safe to assume, do you think, that he's got another run in him for some higher office down the road? And if so, what would it be? David, why don't you go first, and then we'll get Ginn's thoughts.
Well, I think that he definitely would consider something. Timing is everything in politics, as we know. I think that he was interested, certainly in running for governor after Baker, but it just wasn't in the cards for him. So I think governor would be something if it was available at the right time. Remember, he's still pretty young. He's 55. U.S. Senate. I also hear from a lot of people, and people can take this as they want, but the possibility that he could be on a national ticket, a vice presidential nominee. Again, take that for what you want. You can certainly see what the advantages would be, and he has a national presence now, and certainly a national labor presence. But I think it's timing. I think at this point he's done the things he wants to do. Now he'll come and take opportunities where they come.
All right, Ginn, you're going to get the last word here. What do you hear about what Walsh might want to do politically down the road?
Well, I would agree with David that timing is a lot of things in politics, and it kind of depends. And I heard the same things, that he was interested in running for governor. Obviously, that didn't work out. But he's a young guy. We'll see what happens. And my sense was, when he became mayor, he wasn't going to stay there as long as Menino did. I think he's open to a lot of things. But it's like when you're in the private sector and you're making that kind of money, it's kind of hard to give that up to go back into public life.
It would at least make it easier to be patient about your time, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Gin, Dumcius, David Bernstein, thank you both for being here. Enjoyed it.